Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about Kubernetes schema validation. We're going to understand what is exactly the schema validation process and why it's important and what are the tools natively and open source that you can use to do that. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Eyar Zilberman. I'm leading the product and co-founder at Datree. I'm also one of the organizers of the biggest GitHub community in the world right here in Israel. I hate SQL, but I do love regex. And I'm also fully aware that I have pink bunny ears. Yes, let's put it on the table, it's a gimmick. But I promise you, if you're going to stay until the end of this presentation, you understand exactly why I'm doing it. So Datree is an open source tool for developers or engineers, and it can help you prevent any Kubernetes misconfigurations. The way that it's doing it, it's a CLI tool, so it's integrated inside your CI/CD workflow, and it will run automatically every time that someone is doing a change to your Kubernetes manifest. It will run to make sure that you don't have any misconfigurations that are introduced when someone is making those changes. It will verify it against predefined policies that the organization is setting to make sure that everyone aligned on the same policy. So that's about the tree, but enough about the tree, let's talk about Kubernetes schema validation. So what is it exactly? I like to refer it as a set of unit tests to verify that your manifest contain the correct properties, key and value. Think about it. Let's have this example. It's a subset of a Kubernetes manifest, and I have two misconfigurations inside this file. One, the word deployment needs to start with a capital D. The key namespace should have a lower s. So the schema validation should catch those kind of misconfigurations. And you're probably wondering who is actually writing all those unit tests. So it's the community. You can actually write a pull request and open it in the Kubernetes community if you have some kind of a unit test or another validation that you want to add to the schema, and it will be checked and it can also be accepted. So what is not part of the schema validation? Everything that is related to making sure that it's a valid YAML file, or to make sure that it's performing the best, that it's actually holding the best practices. For example, making sure that you have memory and CPU limit. Yeah, those are the mandatory best practices, I know, but it's not really necessary to apply your manifest, so it's not part of the schema validation. It will also not check if you have a team or organization policy. For example, make sure that it's a really common one. Make sure that all the images are pulled from a private registry. It's not part of the schema validation. It's part of a different flow. So how do I use the schema validation? Good news, you don't need to do anything. It's activated by default every time that you're trying to apply a configuration into a cluster. Bad news, it's probably going to be too late. You're probably going to see those misconfigurations when you're trying to apply it. You want to see it much earlier in the process when they are introduced into your configuration. So how do I shift it left? Well, kubectl have a flag for that. It's called dry run, and it's have two mode, client and server, and you can run it before you do kubectl apply. So what's the difference between those two modes? Let's check. So of course, they are both perform schema validation. Makes sense. Server mode also perform extra validations. During the presentation, I will go deeper into exactly which kind of validation it's making. But it's only supported on the server mode, it's not supported on the client mode, because those validations are not part of the schema. The server mode and both the client mode are not supporting different Kubernetes schema versions. So let's think about a use case for that. Let's say that your Kubernetes version is 1.18 and you want to upgrade to version 1.20. So you want to make sure that all the manifests that you already have don't contain something that's going to be deprecated in version 1.20. So the downside with this flag is that you can't do it. You can only check against a predefined schema for a specific version. In this case, you can only check it against the version 1.18. How about requiring a connection to your cluster? So in the server mode, you have to have a connection. Makes sense. And in the client mode, you also need to have a connection. Wait, what? Why? So it's a bug. So you probably think to yourself, oh, that's a nice bug. It's going to be fixed really soon. The answer is no. It's a bug, and this bug is actually open for a long time. Last time that I checked, they have more than 1,000 open bugs on the Kubernetes project, so don't have a high expectation on that. So this makes the client mode unnecessary. I don't see any reason to use it. This was the only reason to actually use the client mode, because it's not supposed to require the connection to your cluster. So the question is, what should I do? Open source to the rescue. We have two great projects that can help you verify your Kubernetes schema in offline mode. One of them is called kubeval, the other one is called kubeperform. They are both working in the same way. So inside the Kubernetes project, you have a Swagger file. It's an open API definition of all the schema definitions. So there's another process that is happening by both of those projects that's converting this Swagger file into different JSON schema files. I'm not going to get into why they are doing it and why it's happening. I'm just going to mention it. Then the CLI tools, kubeval and kubeperform, they are both doing the same way. They are checking those they are checking those schemas when you're running it offline. So this is why you don't need to have a connection, because they actually have their own local copy of the schema definition inside those repositories when they converted it from the open API into a JSON schema. So which one should I use? kubectl, server mode, or the open source tools? Let's do QA. So this is a manifest, and inside this manifest there's an invalid label value. You see the app label, so -- it's not valid. And if you try to apply it, you get this nasty error with basically saying that you can't start your label with a dash. It needs to start with either alphanumeric letter or a number. So if you try to run it with kubectl server mode, it will catch it. If you try to run it with one of the open source, it will not catch it. The reason for that is that, remember that we talked about extra validation that is performed on the server side. So this is one of those extra validations. You expect it to be part of the schema, but it's not. It's another validation that is happening. I really don't know what's the reason for that, and if someone has an answer for it, I will be more than happy to know why is that like that. So let's do another QA. Okay, take two. This manifest is missing an image. You see that I have the name and I have the port, so I don't have the image itself. If I try to apply it with dry run server mode, kubectl will catch it. Open source will not catch it. Again, from the same reason, it's not performing those extra validations that you expect to be part of the schema. Same thing, I don't know why not. So who is the winner in this case? If you have a connection to your cluster, of course kubectl is the winner. But in the majority of cases, you don't. And if this is also the case for you, and you don't have a connection to your cluster, because you either don't want to have your developers to have a direct connection to the cluster, or you don't want your CI machines to have a connection into your production environment. So it's not probably, but it's necessary that kubeval and kubeperform are the winner if this is your use case. But which one is better, kubeval or kubeperform? So we talked about the version support use case. The thing is that kubeval, the last commit was in 2020. So that's saying that the latest version of Kubernetes version schema that it's supporting is 1.18.1, which is pretty shame, because kubeconfirm is supporting up to version 122.4, which is the latest right now. So you remember the use case that I described, that if you want to actually check your manifest before you upgrade your cluster. So kubeconfirm and kubeeval, you can pass this parameter and tell it locally to tell you if there are any API that are deprecated in the new version that you want to upgrade to. It's really, really nice. CRD support. Kubeeval is not supporting CRDs. Actually, this is exactly the reason why the maintainer of kubeconfirm, it's a guy named Jan. He's a really cool guy, and this is the reason why he started this project. It's because it was missing this CRD support. And today, CRDs are more and more popular, so it's pretty shame that kubeeval is not supporting that. Let's look at the community. So kubeeval have a really big community, more than 2,000 stars, more than 200 forks. Again, the last commit was on April 26, which indicate that this project is not maintained that much. With kubeconfirm, it's only have 340 stars, which is a lot actually. But the good news that is still maintained by the maintainer and by the community. Last commit was 8 days ago. So in my opinion, yes, maybe kubeeval is more popular and more people are familiar with kubeeval, but I do think that kubeconfirm still have a strong community to consider. So who is the winner in this case? Well, you probably guessed it already. It's obviously kubeconfirm. Okay, so now that we understand the different tools that we have, let's think about different strategies to validate the Kubernetes schema. The first thing that you want to consider is shifting left. Like we said, you want to make sure that you can test it as soon as possible. So sometimes even the CI is too late in the flow. Try to think how you can implement those checks inside the developer's environments. For example, as a pre-commit or Git hook or something like that. Don't forget to fill the gaps. What do I mean by that? So remember the extra validation that we talked about that are happening on the server side? Those validations also need to be checked when you are using the open source tools, because you don't want to find that you have misconfigurations when you want to apply it to your cluster. There's an alternative that you can think to use, which is running a fake cluster locally or in your CI machines with Kind or Minikube or something like that. And then you can use the kubectl dry run server mode, because it will talk with the local cluster. And this way you can still use this flag and you don't need to have a connection to your real environment. The downside of doing it like that is that you actually need to make sure that your fake cluster is synced with your real environment and it's actually replicating the same conditions. What do I mean? So it needs to have the same namespaces, the same number of clusters and so on. Or what will happen is that when you try to apply the manifest, it will get rejected by Minikube or Kind. Also, something to consider is buy versus build. So there are a lot of open source tools to implement to overcome those challenges, but there's a lot of really good out-of-the-shelf solutions that you can just buy. Yes, Datree is also one of them. And in Datree, we also perform the schema validation, but we're also helping you fill the gap with custom rules. So it's something that you can consider. There's no dark magic in what we are doing. You can do the same with different open source tools that you glue together. But think about if it's worth your time and effort to do that, or just buy something out of the shelf. That's it. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And now for me to reveal why I actually have those pink banners is because this is the name of the repository, that inside this repository you're going to find this presentation. If you want to see this presentation, you want to see all the other resources that I talked about, you can find it all inside. And probably if I will give it another name, you're going to forget it. But with the pink banners, I hope that you think like, I remember the bunny that told me that I need to do schema validation. What is the name of the repository? What is the name? Oh yeah, it's Pink Bunny Ears. And I already checked, this is the only repository in the entire, in all over GitHub that have this name. So I hope no one else is going to open it. Another repository in the same name, so you can just Google it, and you should also go to find this repository. And the last thing is that I also wrote a blog post about this same topic, and everything that I discussed is also listed there, so you can also check it out, and we also put a link inside the repository. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy it. Oh, also, by the way, if you have any questions, you can open an issue inside this repository. I'm a watcher, and I also always reply if someone want to have more information about schema validation.